of the Education Preparation and Licensure Study Committee to order. It is my honor to welcome new members, Mr. Nick Darnell and Mr. Jordan Mullenhour. I don't believe he's joined us yet, but we expect him to. And returning member, Mr. Bob Eby. And thank you all for joining us today as once again we hear several very important presentations from the staff of the State Board of Education and the Tennessee Department of Education. And as always, we have a lot to cover, so we'll get started right away. And I will remind all of our presenters to please state your name and title for the record. Thank you. We will begin now with our first presentation from Michael Derline.
Madam Chair, I believe Elizabeth is going to share these slides with us, and then we will briefly have an agenda slide, and then we will go into the TDOE presentation.
Thank you, Erica. You and I should debrief before we do that. Not debrief, but have a briefing before we start. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Erica, it's giving me some trouble uploading. Can you do it on your end?
Yes, I should be able to do that. That's fine.
While we do that, I do see, Madam Chair, that Jordan has been able to log in. So I know that you had some words of welcome for him and for Nick joining this study committee. So we're excited to have 4 board members on it now.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me know, because I can't see him yet.
Hey guys, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Sorry for being a minute late. I was working through my latest of, I think, dozens of Tennessee.gov logins, and I'm learning how to navigate. So thank you for the moment of absence. I will be joining by video in just about 5 minutes.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much. We should also welcome our guests from the TACD Executive Board of Directors. So thank you so much for being here with us too.
All right, are you able to see the title slide now?
Yes, it's not showing his full screen though. I don't know if you're able to do that or not in this mode.
Yeah.
If not, it's still legible if not.
I'll try again. Apologies for the technical difficulties.
No, that's perfect.
Okay, it looks like it's up correctly now. All right, thank you everyone for your patience. We'll be going through several different items on our agenda today. First of all, my name is Erica Light. I'm the Director of Research for the State Board of Education, and we are happy to have here with us today a few different presenters from the Tennessee Department of Education. They will be giving their presentations first. We'll be hearing about the implementation of EPP literacy standards. Then we will have a discussion about instructor requirements for teaching as a profession, or TAP, which is a career pathway of courses that is available to high school students in Tennessee. We will then have a couple of presentations from myself, including about the Educator Preparation Report Card, which will be released publicly in just over 2 weeks. Then we will have a presentation on statewide and Tpa results, and we will conclude with a discussion with our guests from the TACD Executive Board. And with that, I will turn it over to the Tennessee Department of Education for their presentation on EPP literacy standards and accountability.
Thanks, Erica and Madam Chair and board members. As always, we're very happy to be here. I am Michael Derline, the Senior Director of Educator Licensure and Preparation. I'm joined by Annie Insana, Senior Director of Educator Preparation. You can skip past this one. So we have a lot to cover today. We thought, especially for new board members, it might be helpful to kind of go back a little bit and talk about the 2017 EPP literacy standards, the accountability process we engaged in at that point, to make sure EPPs were well aligned to those standards. And then we'll kind of fast forward and talk about the timeline, kind of starting with the Literacy Success Act and going all the way through what we're proposing for accountability with the recent change in the literacy standards. And then briefly talk about some long-term support ideas that we have for this space. So I've been around with the department for about 9 years now, and I remember when we had literacy standards before 2017. I think Tennessee may have been a leader at that time, and early on had literacy standards that were really primarily focused on reading, in the sense that they were focused on developing aspects of learning to read, with some requirements focused on things like phonemic awareness, vocabulary fluency, but it still was kind of lacking. They were also limited in scope to early childhood endorsements, elementary endorsements, and middle grades education as well. Just prior to 2017, we convened a standard setting committee and brought folks together to really revise those standards in virtually all endorsement areas. So there was not only a need to dig deeper into the content of those standards, but also to expand them. And so we proposed revisions to those standards, which also included expanding them to special education and instructional leader. And then we had to kind of figure out, well, how do we engage with our EPPs? Because at this point, we were really looking at these literacy standards as a massive undertaking that would require essentially a complete overhaul of the way literacy preparation looked in Tennessee. And so we hired Annie. Annie came on board to support implementation of these standards. And we kind of looked to our peer groups and we recruited folks. We paid them, we trained them. So we had over 60 EPP and LEA reviewers. And then we had a very succinct process by which EPPs had to submit evidence demonstrating various aspects of preparation with respect to the content and coursework, candidate assessment, clinical practice. And it was most definitely not a compliance-oriented process. This was a very rich and deep evaluation that we were doing at that time. And we also viewed this as not a one and done sort of thing. And so what we did after that initial review in 2017-18 was to start to think about how we can incorporate literacy preparation review requirements in our just ongoing approval process. So now, today, if an entity wants to become an EPP, there are requirements related to literacy. If they want to continue operating, there are requirements related to literacy in our process. And anytime an EPP wants to propose new specialty area programs, so let's say they want to propose an early childhood program that they hadn't offered in the past, there are additional literacy-focused requirements. Okay, so that's kind of a really quick overview of where we've been. So the board has done a whole lot of work already on developing standards. We had a very rich and rigorous process for reviewing EPPs against those standards. And then kind of fast forward to last year, about a year ago, the Literacy Success Act was passed. And that provided a framework to really narrow the focus even more on things like foundational skills, high quality instructional materials, and trauma-informed instruction. And the requirements of the Literacy Success Act really spelled out an aggressive timeline for doing this. And so we kind of quickly turned around some revisions to the standards, and the state board adopted those in the summer of last summer, 2021. And we recognized that there was a need to support EPPs given this really tight timeline. And so we offered what we're calling Epp Innovation Grants. You've heard from folks who are developing that content. And they started work on developing it shortly after the bill was passed. In fall of 2021, we convened with the TACTI group. This is really a space where we can get as much information out to people as we possibly can, but also they have these breakout sessions where we can dive a little bit deeper into specific areas of focus, and that's just what we've done. So that has been a really great point to make sure that EPPs are all on the same page with expectations and understandings of the new standards. Simultaneously, our EPP innovation grantees are piloting their content. We want to learn from what they've developed and anything we may need to tweak within that content. And so that's happening now as well. Looking ahead to spring, just in a couple weeks, we have the next TACTI conference, and we're going to dig really deep into high quality instructional materials. Jared Myracle from the department will actually be there to support our plenary conversation. And then we'll have breakouts with our grantees again to provide updates on the innovation grant work and the content that they've developed thus far. And then ultimately, this leads to an accountability process. That is our role in all of this, and we need to make sure that EPPs not only understand and are supported in this work, but also held accountable for it. And so what we are kind of in the middle of right now is developing a process that is rigorous, but also streamlined. We can't exactly go back to what we did back in 2017-18 and recruit 60 reviewers. And so we're going to share a little more information about our current thinking around this and hopefully get some feedback today. All right, Annie, I think am I turning it over to you here or next section?
You are. I'm happy to
Great.
take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie.
Hi, everyone. Annie Ansana, Senior Director of Educator Preparation. This slide here demonstrates a call out specifically of the Tennessee Literacy Success Act and how it applies to our EPPs. Specifically, EPPs must provide training on reading instruction focused on foundational literacy standards for particular populations, K through 3, and that would include both general and special education students, as well as, candidates, as well as instructional leader candidates. The standards that were developed collaboratively with our office and the Office of Academics and Student Readiness, and they do focus on those specifics laid out in law that are illustrated here in these sub-bullets. Specifically, when we think about the program areas that will be affected within the legislation, we look at these endorsement areas that are early childhood, elementary, and special education and instructional leader. So these are the standards that in the literacy and specialty area standards policy 5.505, these are the specific endorsements that fall within those newly adopted standards from 2021. We have an asterisk by the special education interventionist 612. That endorsement does fall under the same standards within policy, but because the legislation focuses in on that pre-K3 grade span, we are proposing to exclude that particular endorsement area from this proposed process. So what does the proposed accountability structure look like moving forward? We've had the fortunate opportunity to work with the Council of the Chief State School Officers, or Ccsso collaboration, over the last several months. And we have been working with 8 other states and our coaches to think about Edtpa and what trauma-informed instruction, HQIM specifically, looks like, and what other states are doing in that space. And so through this collaboration, we really started thinking about what does this process look like for EPPs to align to these new standards that fall in those buckets of HQIM, trauma-informed, and many other critical areas. And through that process, we learned that Louisiana had employed a signed assurance process when they, several years ago, when they were supporting their EPPs to align to updated EPP approval standards. And that process worked really well for Louisiana, and we learned from that. It was a fairly compliance-based process. It was more of like a checklist of requirements that got into some detail about what EPPs were required to do to align to those particular standards. So as we approached what we are thinking for the accountability structure moving forward, we did want to strike that balance between a compliance-based process and one that requires significant evidence and submission and review, similar to what we did in 2017. So what does that kind of look like in terms of that balance? Oops. Yeah, I jumped ahead. So we're proposing with the, there we go. We're proposing with the signed assurance process that this process will have essentially 3 components. The EPP head administrator will sign off and attest to certain specifics within the sections 2 and 3, and essentially acknowledge that the information that they're submitting is going to be complete and accurate, and that they will implement their plans laid out in section 2 and 3 with fidelity. Section 2, we're proposing completion of matrices that will demonstrate alignment between the courses that they have in preparation and clinical experiences with the 2021 standards. We think this will demonstrate a breadth of coverage of those standards across all approved programs. And then thirdly, we're proposing a demonstration of plans where EPPs will provide narratives and explain a bit in some detail about how they will integrate those foundational skills standards within applicable programs. This is a snapshot of our proposed, what a matrix would look like. We would customize these to each EPP so that they would be very clear on which programs would require this alignment. And it's hard to see along the bottom, but there will be different tabs for program pathways. So if an EPP offers an undergraduate program and post-bac programs, they would demonstrate alignment and lay out specifically what they will, what assignments and assessments they will use to align to these new standards across courses and clinical experiences. I will say our EPPs are very familiar with this format, as it does mirror similar review processes that we have in place now. And this is a representative sample of some of the questions that we would ask in part 3 of the signed assurance process, where we would ask questions such as, if the EPPs are going to pick up and use the EPP Innovation Grant modules, they could demonstrate that within the literacy matrix. And then we would ask them questions such as, describe what changes will be made to existing programs to accommodate the new content that they will be picking up from those grantees. If EPPs decide not to use the innovation modules, then we would ask them questions such as, describe the methods used in preparation to ensure that the required standards are integrated within and across those applicable programs. So this is our approach that we are proposing and working still with our Office of Academics to think through specific details and welcome any feedback, of course, from this group as well. And with that, I think I'm turning it back over to Michael.
Thanks, Annie. Just playing ping pong here. So I think I said this earlier, just that we recognize this is going to be a big lift for EPPs, and we wanted to devote as much energy as we possibly could to supporting them over the course of this year.
Sorry, I realized I'd skipped a slide.
That's okay, no worries. And you've heard about the EPP Innovation Grants. We are, as I noted, they're currently partnering with a number of EPPs across the state to partner or to pilot this content. We do anticipate they're going to learn quite a bit from that. Does preparation look different in a job embedded context or a post-bac context or undergraduate? You know, the asynchronous nature of some of the content that it has been designed, how is that going to work in programs, and how does decision making work as far as implementing that asynchronous content throughout courses? And so those are some of the things that those folks are wrestling with right now, to be able to provide some guidance that can be sent out to EPPs as they start to consider how they might use this content. As I mentioned already, the TACD breakouts have been fantastic. Just a huge thanks to the TACD folks for engaging us so much in their conference. We really appreciate just having that opportunity and being able to bring people in, and the exposure that we have is really exactly what I think is needed, and that space has been really welcome. So in a couple weeks, as I mentioned, we'll be digging in with the TACTI group and having those breakout sessions. And we'll also focus quite a bit on high quality instructional materials. There has been a lot of discussion, maybe some of you have been exposed to this, around the intersection of Edtpa and high quality instructional materials. How can candidates successfully complete Edtpa and meet the expectations of HQIM training? And so we're working on developing some guidance to support that. We are really just happy about some of the initial findings that we've seen both from Pearson and our pilot EPPs, that there is alignment between Edtpa and HQIM, and I think a conversation just simply needs to happen in guidance to support that.
And Michael, before we move away from this page, do you have the number of EPPs that are currently piloting the grant, well, from the UTK and Deans for Impact, the courses that they developed? Do you know how many are currently partnering in the pilot?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but we may be able to find that before we're done presenting. Annie, do you know off the top of your head?
I do. In total, across all four, I'm doing quick math, it looks like 16 EPPs across. Now, some of those do overlap. If they're piloting, say, with foundational skills, they might also be piloting with trauma-informed. But we can give you a list of those pilot EPPs if you'd like.
Very good. And then in the last bullet, you mentioned that you're developing guidance to ensure instruction and implementation is streamlined. What's the time frame for that? I don't believe I saw that on, I think you have a timeline page, but I don't recall seeing that included. It may be there.
Our big hope is that we can release some of this guidance at the TACTI conference.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Are there any questions before we move on to the next part of their presentation? Okay, back to you. Thank you.
Are we done with this part of it and going to a different subject, or are we continuing this subject?
We have 2 more slides.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I'll hold till the end.
Okay. Oh, I just had something on the tip of my tongue. Lost it. Ccsso Engagement. So Annie talked about this a bit. That has also been a really great space. It's also nice, by the way, especially in this remote environment, to connect with states across the country that are doing very similar work. That's something that's kind of been lacking in our remote world. We are also part of the Teacher Licensure Collaborative, which is a very recently formed national group that has brought states together specifically to talk about trauma-informed instruction preparation. And so we're learning from them as well. And then, I will also say that in the 9 years in which I've been at the department, this has been probably one of the best examples of cross-team work within the department. There has been some really fantastic collaboration between our office, the Office of Academics, and the Student Readiness divisions. This slide doesn't have a whole lot of meat to it, but we wanted to give some just indicator of where we're thinking as far as long-term support. What we don't want to happen is for this accountability process and resource support process to end in August. And so what we're thinking ahead is to provide some opportunities for networking amongst EPPs, as we've done before. Make sure that faculty and staff at EPPs have access to training opportunities, and then also conduct some on-site audits with feedback. So actually go into EdPrep classrooms and review what's going on and provide some feedback. I would be happy to take any questions you all may have.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Eby.
Yeah, first, let me applaud the department for all your efforts here and putting together these courses and working with EPPs. I think it's awesome and looking forward. How do you evaluate the effectiveness of the courses that you develop across the EPPs? Is there some standardized test? Of course, I know you got the Edtpa, but at the end of the day, we can do all the training. How do we evaluate how effective that training was and then being transmitted?
That is a really great question, Bob. I think you could probably respond to that in a few different ways. I'll just kind of give my initial thoughts, and Annie, if you have anything you want to add, please feel free. But the one thing we're making sure to do right now is to have our EPP innovation grantees align their content directly to the standards, so that we have that map to be able to ground ourselves in the standards. I would also say that content will include candidate assessment opportunities. So EPPs will be collecting data, formative data, to be able to understand whether their candidates are kind of on the right track with these competencies. But at the end of the day, I think, we point to things like student outcomes and candidate assessments as those measures. Obviously, you all know that the law requires PD or a literacy assessment. I think if our assessment is aligned to our standards and preparation is aligned to those standards, then we should start to see some outcomes that we can report on there. Annie, any other thoughts that?
I don't think so. I think this is very much a question that we have been talking with multiple folks around, and I think it's a great question.
Okay, I think, at the end of the day, I think that's what's going to matter is how much difference we've made. But, I think this is a great start, and you got to get started someplace. And again, I applaud the department for the efforts that they put on it, and look forward to seeing, as we go through the process. Thank you.
Michael, I do want to follow up on the timeline page when we speak about in the spring of 2022, you're attending the TACD conference. I believe you're going to make a presentation that incorporates all of this. But you talked about the signed assurances piece. Have you released any of this to our EdPrep partners yet? And will that be, other than the executive board that's here with us today? So is that when you preview, excuse me, preview it for all EPPs? Is that the timing?
At TACD.
At TACD? So that will be the
yes.
Okay. And so then that will be when it's released, and just making sure the signed assurance documentation is due in April, and the matrices, when are they supposed to complete that? At the same time in April? Just want to be sure.
Yes, that's correct. It's essentially going to come as a package, is the way we're looking at it right now.
And so there's no concern on your part, and we can find out from our partners today, their consideration regarding the timing and the ability to complete this information in a timely manner, or if there's sufficient time to do that. So.
Yeah, I would love to get some feedback on that. I also think we anticipate that most EPPs will pick up the EPP innovation content, right? And so what that's going to come with will be some alignment to standards, as I mentioned a moment ago, right. And kind of a map for how candidates complete it. So some of the work will be kind of done for them in that regard. But we also have the option that EPPs could develop their own content.
Very good. Thank you.
Michael, one other question. I think you said that there were 16 EPPs that were going through this grant process. Refresh my memory, 16 out of how many total EPPs do we have?
Well, right now I think we have 43. Is that right, Annie?
43, and I have a listing in front of me, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 total that are engaging, but some of those 9 are engaging in pilots across multiple areas.
Gotcha. So basically 20% of the EPPs are involved in the grant process. Thanks.
Yeah. And as a reminder too, we have 4 different grant programs. There are 2 in foundational skills, 1 in trauma-informed instruction, and 1 in high-quality instructional materials.
And then I have just one more question. I know it's under long-term support to the EPPs and the items that you outlined there. Do you have any projected time frame for when you would begin to introduce the networking and the other items that you've listed?
Ideally next school year. I think that we will likely have to start doing some planning now to be able to do that. And our focus of the moment is on the accountability process, but that's definitely something we'd want to do sooner rather than later.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
All right. Well, I know Dr. Luna is with us. I'll take just a moment and set up this presentation. I'm Dr. Amy Owen, Deputy Executive Director for Policy and Research for the State Board. This is a topic, the requirements for educators who are going to teach the Teaching as a Profession courses that came up at the October 2021 State Board meeting. And our board member, Nick Darnell, made the point that at present, any educator with a secondary endorsement may teach the Teaching as a Profession course. And his question was, how do we make sure that students are having the best possible introduction to becoming a teacher? Is there some sort of additional requirement that should be placed on educators before they may teach this course? And I know the department's got several ideas and thoughts to share here, but before we get into that, Nick, is there anything else you wanted to give as context?
Yeah, Amy, I appreciate the time that we've carved out to discuss this. There are a few conversations that the board ever has that we don't discuss the teacher shortage that we're faced with. And as a board, we just don't have a lot of means, I feel like, to be able to just fix that, right? We don't have budgeting abilities. We don't have a lot of ways. So I really just wanted to hear from the department because they can see a big picture, right? They can see, all right, here are some things that we think would be really good ideas versus, well, that may sound good, but here are the things, because I know that I can't see the whole picture, whereas they can. So I'm very interested to hear their thoughts and ideas. If there is anything that we can do as a board to really start a positive road for a lot of our high school students who are trying to figure out what they want to do, and they could make phenomenal teachers. And I just want to make sure that they have that positive start, as they consider joining an EPP. So I'll stop and let the department share.
Well, thank you so much. I am Jean Luna. I'm the Chief of Student Readiness. So I oversee the divisions of college, career, and technical education, as well as the student and family supports. So teaching as a profession is one of the programs of study within CTE. So here we are. This is the TAP courses, as we so call them. So I do want to emphasize that Education and Training Career Cluster is one of 16 career clusters that are options within CTE. Within that career cluster, there are a few different options, and teaching as a profession is one of them, along with early childhood and education therapy and support. And I will say, as a former high school principal and high school director, I feel very strongly about this course. And like many of you, I think having the best teachers teaching these courses does make a huge impact. We know that teachers make such a difference in the classroom. So I will start by saying that. So when we think about the TAP pathway, currently, as it stands, there are 4 courses that are available to be offered. It's Fundamentals of Education, which is essentially those foundations of education, TAP 1, TAP 2, and then the Practicum course. We do want to emphasize that there are courses in development currently. One of those will be coming up for your approval, and that is going to be the Foundations of Literacy Practicum. That does tie into that Literacy Success Act that we have talked about before. We are revising those standards in the other courses to embed pieces of the literacy within all of those courses, but we really felt it was essential to have a standalone course as well for those future teachers who really want to get a leg up on learning that literacy piece that we know is so important before they go to college. The other course that we have in development is going to be a statewide dual credit opportunity. So this would actually be something somewhat equivalent like to an intro to teaching course that you would take your first year of college if you were going to become a teacher. And that will give the opportunity to earn early post-secondary credits and also just take another course for those that are interested in teaching. So I kind of wanted to give that highlight. So just some background for those of you who weren't aware of all of those pieces. If we can go to the next slide, I really want to talk through some of these teacher considerations. And I want to emphasize that at the department, we certainly are open to having conversations in this space because I think we want to make sure we've got the best people in place, while we also want to make sure that we aren't doing anything to unintentionally exclude people or limit this offering. Again, I think one of the considerations, just to keep at the top of our minds, it had been mentioned about perhaps limiting who could teach this course based upon their teacher effectiveness score. So essentially their score at the end of the year. So I think some things we need to think about with that, if we are considering that, are a few things. First of all, a teacher in this course would be considered a non-tested teacher. Obviously, there is no end of course test in teaching as a profession, so their students would not be exhibiting competencies in this field that directly relates back to the teacher. With that being said, that means that the teacher would have 70% of their calculation be just based on their own observations, with the other 30% on the growth and achievement scores, or those growth and achievement measures. I would like to just say, as part of that and with considerations and thinking through that, if we were to say, put the limit on it must be a level 4 or 5 teacher, I think we would want to think through that very carefully, thinking perhaps, let's say, if a teacher on their own accord was a level 3 teacher by teacher observations alone, but their school-wide TVAS or their growth and the achievement was a level 1, they could potentially be declared by the end of the year a level 2 teacher, even though their own observation was a 3. So if we were to say this had to be a level 4 or 5 teacher, that may be very difficult, especially in some low performing schools. So I think it's just something to consider and think through, because we certainly don't want to limit teaching as a profession being available in low achieving school systems. Vice versa, I think that's probably where we want to pull as many kids as we can. So again, just a consideration to think through. I think the other thing we want to think through is just recruitment of teachers. Oh, going back, one other point is, I think also we would not want the unintentional fidelity of teacher observation scores being skewed. And I don't think anyone would do this intentionally. However, I do think if I'm a principal and I am observing my teacher and I know that he or she must have a level 3, 4, 5, whatever it is determined, and I am looking at them and I'm like, I think they're really probably a level 2 in this field, but I know we need to get them to a level 3. Just something to consider. I don't think anyone would do it intentionally, but again, a consideration. The next thing I would talk about would be the recruitment of teachers into the field. Obviously, we want as many teachers that are quality teachers as possible. I think something we could potentially consider may be years of experience. Again, years of experience does not necessarily equate to an excellent teacher. I've seen first year, second year teachers who are phenomenal And vice versa. Some teachers at the end of their career may not be putting as much into it as they once had. So it's a consideration. I would also say growth over time. As a former administrator, working with some teachers who potentially their first, second year, I wasn't quite sure that they were going to make it, but with coaching and with a lot of time, effort, intentionality, ended up becoming excellent teachers. So it may even be something, if we were to consider something like level of effectiveness, that we almost gave a runway, so the first couple of years it may be, a level 3 versus a higher level moving forward. Again, just something to think about. I would say that our absolute goal in the state of Tennessee is to grow the number of teaching as a profession programs that we have throughout the state. Again, emphasizing the fact there are 16 career clusters. Within 16 career clusters, there are several within each of those that are different programs of study. So competitively, you could have a high school that's only offering a handful. So we want to make sure we have as many teaching as a profession courses as many schools as possible. Some things that we're obviously doing in that space. I know you've already probably heard about our innovative high school models, which is essentially, we have some grow your own models for teaching in that program. We're hoping to expand the innovative school models and what that looks like, but potentially, again, some of this grow your own model to have as many as possible. One thing that I would also really like to highlight is the field experiences that occur within these courses. So we highly encourage the high school programs and teachers to have their students out in the field actually getting observation in with other teachers throughout all 4 years of this program. So what I would actually introduce as an idea would be, I think it's going to be really important if we are having our high school kids in with either elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers, pre-K programs. Perhaps we think about those teachers and the selection and making sure that we are placing them each time with really high quality teachers. That may be level 3, 4, 5 teachers. It may be teachers that we deem have the multiple years of experience. Again, I think when we think about growth of the program, it's going to be much easier when we think about all the teachers within districts and within availability and what that might look like just to go 1 hour a week or something for some field experiences to make sure that we have exposure to really high quality effective teachers in that space. So those are just a few of the thoughts that I have thinking about the teacher considerations for teaching as a profession. Happy to entertain any thoughts, questions.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Darnell.
Dr. Luna, I appreciate this is exactly what I wanted to hear, to see, again, the big picture, because you can think through these things much better than I can. And so this was extremely helpful to see the different angles of possibly using a level of effectiveness, years of profession, years in the profession. So it's been very, very helpful. I have a couple questions. Do you know, and this may be something that you have to look up, how many systems have a TAP program across the state? At least, one school within the system that has that.
Absolutely. And I was trying to get that information for you today, and our system was actually down, but I will definitely get that and share that with you. I will also track that over the last couple of years, because what we're trying to determine is that growth and trying to increase that number. So we will get that information for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was excited to hear that there's going to be a dual enrollment opportunity possibly in the future. I think that's exciting. I know that when I was in teacher ed, I took a couple summer classes so I could go ahead and finish early. So I think that would be an exciting thing for someone who wants to get into the field, get into the classroom a little faster. So just kind of trying to wrap my brain around everything, it really sounds like maybe the direction that we could look as a board, depending on how the others feel, is that maybe the field experience is the way to go in making sure that the placement in the schools themselves are with the best and the brightest. Because I understand with the limitations of those who can teach and different things, but I think that may be something that we can look at as a board, of making sure the placements in those classrooms, the experience that they're gaining, the time, is with a high quality teacher. So
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, even the indication and whatever that may look like, I don't know that we would want to put anything too stringent, but just emphasizing that high quality placement with an experienced teacher. And knowing that in the field, again, sometimes you've got some very energetic first year teachers that may not even have a score yet, that maybe the teacher wants to expose them to, because just for whatever reason, they can really show that enthusiasm and motivation. And then you can also expose them to that teacher who's been teaching for 20 years and has, 50, 60, 70% of their kids passing the AP exam, which is so difficult to pass. So I think, emphasizing that placement and thinking through that really makes a lot of sense to me.
thank you.
It also seems like it would echo what we do in the ed prep space in terms of requirements for who may serve as a clinical mentor for educator candidates. So that could be a good connection.
Exactly.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Eby.
I have to admit that I haven't looked at the curriculum for the course, but clearly, I think it will make an impact on encouraging people to go in the teaching profession and makes a difference. But as part of that curriculum, do the students get something like ethics of teaching? I'm sure they get a lot of instruction on how to teach, and they, get the content. But every quarter, we on the board address licensure issues, et cetera, which to me, from the very beginning, if we were teaching the ethics of teaching, it would avoid a lot of issues. Is that part of the curriculum, or how do they get that?
Absolutely. And that's actually some of what's in that first foundational course. The fundamentals of education is just really thinking about the background, some of those components that I would consider foundational to education. And then throughout each course, they are embedded within. And that's definitely part of the conversations as before they go out to field experiences and clinicals. There's so many things to think about before you start interacting with children. So those are definitely conversations that are had.
Excellent. Thanks.
I think part of the conversation we have had a number of times, I believe in workshop, really pertains to the fact that we do have it in policy as well. Let me state this first, that EPPs and LEAs must have a partnership with the EPP. And there has to be this synergy, obviously, where we're expecting the EPPs to have this rich pipeline of individual candidates who are going into their program. But yet the LEA has a strong responsibility with regard to that. And we've had conversations around hearing educators discourage students from going down the path of going into teaching because of their own experience. And so I've had many a conversation with principals and teachers and directors of schools in regard to their responsibility in encouraging teachers to go into the profession. But I also have heard, well, we're just not in the space where we can offer that. We know we need to help solve the problem, but we have a variety of issues that are in our way in being able to offer it. And I cannot pretend that I know all of those. So Dr. Luna, I'm just curious if you have heard resistance based on a number of different factors that prevent districts from even offering the TAP program.
So I think what I've encountered the most is just enticing students into the course. And so I think you've hit on some of it, is just the actual conversations that are had with teenagers and with young adults about encouraging them to go into the field of education. And so I think we need to do a better job of enticing them into the field of education at all levels. And so what I have found, though, is when we get again, that right teacher and the right program, the program grows itself. I've seen programs in some counties, for instance, where they actually are operating a preschool within the school. And so while they're learning the fundamentals through these courses, 2 or 3 days a week, actual kids come in for a couple of hours. And so they are doing the lesson planning and they're doing the teaching with these kids. And these programs have waiting lists of kids wanting to get into the programs. So I think if we can continue to highlight the best practices, show what works, I think if we can tie it to some of our innovative school models that we have and potential grant opportunities to really show what this could look like, I think it will help grow the program. That is definitely my hope, as well as elevating the career of education. We're also hoping by offering these early post-secondary, what we would call more advanced courses in education and not just in some other fields, we can also entice some of those higher achieving students who want to get EPSOs. And so this would not discourage them. They could do their CTE courses, but also do some early post-secondary as well.
And I think you hit the nail on the head too with the EPSOs, because that's part of what I've heard. We have these students who are more interested in the EPSOs and the other content areas and not this one in particular. And so there's a challenge there. So if the funding is there to support that, it may also make a difference. But the encouragement side of it is really a big part of the equation. So thank you for the answer, and thank you for the great work here. Are there any other questions or comments for Dr. Luna?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Dr. Luna, thank you for your time. Excellent presentation. I have 2 questions, and they're somewhat related. In fact, they build on what you were just talking about. But my first question is, to what extent are these classes oversubscribed? In other words, if we change the standards by which someone can qualify for instructing one of these courses, and we add, where we might have 1 course in a given school program, and we double that to 2, how much of a lift, if you will, can we anticipate? And then kind of the flip side of that is, if we have a district or a school that does not have any of these instructors, and we add the first one, is your experience that it immediately draws 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 candidates to that interest? Again, I'm just trying to get a kind of a qualitative understanding of the upside or lift that might be anticipated if you're successful.
Absolutely. So I would say that we have done some work in this space to expand who can teach this course. I remember back when I was a high school principal, you had to have a degree in essentially family consumer sciences, and that was the only way you could teach this course, which didn't necessarily make a lot of sense. So that endorsement has been expanded. I would say, as you were looking to grow this program, essentially you have to shift what you were teaching over to this program. So when you go to think about building this program, you would essentially start with just probably like 2 classes of the fundamentals, because obviously they can't take the first, second, the third year if they haven't taken the first. You also don't want to have a teacher who has a full day of just the fundamentals of education, because then what happens year 2 when all of a sudden they've got to move on to the next course? So I think you've got to think about that runway into the program. So what I would essentially do is always say, do 2 or 3 sections of that first year, knowing you may lose some kids through moving, through, changes, whatever that might look like, and then build your way up. But again, I would emphasize success builds success. And so when students get motivated and excited, they talk to their friends, they tell each other. So when it is going well in that first year or 2, they tell others, and that's how you expand that program.
Other questions or comments? Once again, thank you, Dr. Luna. Yes, Dr. Owen?
Yes, Madam Chair, I just wanted to verify with Mr. Darnell. I know we discussed at the October board meeting, just because you'd made the statement on the record that you wanted to continue this conversation and see if there were alternative requirements that should be put in place. Do you have any further next steps beyond potentially considering who should be in that kind of mentor role, or who students should be going to observe? Is there anything else formal that you wanted to see take place?
I really think that that should be the target at this time, just with gaining the knowledge of the instructor, the pros and cons of putting limitations on that. I really think maybe that's what we can look at, is placement into the real classroom, and see where we can go with that. What's going to be the most positive outcome, again, without severely limiting where we can place these students. So.
Anything else before we move on? Thank you for joining us, Dr. Luna, and again, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Next up is Erica Light.
Yes, the next item on our agenda today is discussing the upcoming release of the Educator Preparation Report Card. As you all know, we release this report card annually by February 15th, and that means the next release is coming up soon. So this year we will be releasing the report card on exactly February 15th. Past couple of years it's been a little earlier than that due to holidays, but this year we are planning February 15th. The scored domains of the report card this year are going to be the same as they were last year, and those include candidate profile, employment, and candidate assessment. Candidate profile is related to the diversity of the cohort and also the specific areas that these teachers are being prepared to teach in. Employment is, as it sounds like, the record that these teachers have of being employed in Tennessee public schools and how long they remain employed in Tennessee public schools. And candidate assessment is referring to pass rates on the state required licensure assessments. We will once again have 2 unscored domains on the report card. The first of these is provider impact, which follows the teacher evaluation scores of new teachers once they are in their own classroom. This was previously a scored domain, but it is currently unscored due to COVID-19 effects on educator evaluation data. It was unscored last year as well. We've continued to have discussions with our educator advisory council, the report card advisory council, about when it will be appropriate to resume scoring this domain. But for the report card that will be released this year, it is going to remain unscored. Then we finally have the satisfaction domain, which is based on survey data about how satisfied new teachers are with the preparation that they received at their preparation program. EPPs will not be receiving an overall rating this year, and this is due to the missing provider impact score. We have a business rule in place where if you are missing a domain score, then we do not assign an overall score. We had this business rule even before COVID, and we're continuing it with the current situation where we do not have the provider impact ratings. And also, as in previous years, EPPs that have a leader preparation program will receive a separate unscored leader preparation report card, which has some basic information about their leader preparation cohort. Our scoring framework for this year is exactly the same as last year. We do have 20 points assigned to the candidate profile domain, evenly split between racial and ethnic diversity and percentage of high demand endorsements. We have 15 points assigned to employment with emphasis on second-year retention, but also some points for third-year retention. And then 15 points assigned to assessment with greater weight placed on pedagogical assessments. And that's based on feedback we got from EPPs about the effort that EPPs put in to prepare their candidates for pedagogical assessments, particularly the Edtpa. We have in our scoring framework some reserved points. We have 40 points reserved for when we resume scoring provider impact, which we hope to do within sometime in the next couple of years, depending on the situation with teacher evaluation data. And we currently have 10 points unassigned. These could either be assigned to the satisfaction data, which currently has no points assigned to it, or we could use it to reallocate points among the existing metrics. In terms of the performance benchmarks for the report card, each scored metric has both a floor and a target. EPPs that are below the floor, at or below the floor, will receive 0 points. If you are at the target or above the target, you will receive all of the available points for that metric. And then EPPs falling in between the floor and the target will receive a proportional number of points. These floors and targets are set based on 3-year averages. The floors in particular are the 3-year average of the 10th percentile, and the targets are the 3-year average of the 90th percentile. Notably, both of these 3-year averages are excluding the current year. We do that intentionally because if we included the current year, that would sort of force a distribution of performance onto that year's data, and we don't want to have any sort of forced distribution. We want to make it possible for all EPPs to show growth year over year. This is a listing of the floors and targets that we have for each metric. The targets this year are all exactly the same as they were last year. We have made adjustments to a few of the floors though, and this is based, as I said previously, on 3-year averages. So if we've made a change, it's because we've seen changes in the EPP data from the past 3 years. The floor for high demand endorsements has increased from 5 to 10%, and that is due to EPPs generally performing better on this metric. The floor for second year retention has increased from 80 to 85%, again, because EPPs are doing better on this metric. And the floor for the content assessment pass rate has increased from 80 to 85%. In the case of third year retention, we actually have seen a slight decline in average performance on this metric, and as a result, the floor has decreased from 70 to 65%. So we do make these increases in both directions based on what the overall data has been showing us. And I know that the targets, and particularly for pedagogical assessments, the target is all the way up at 100%. You may be asking, well, is that a realistic target to have? But I can say from looking at our data that we actually have many EPPs performing very well on pedagogical assessment pass rates. There are several that are reaching 100%. So we know that this is an achievable goal for them. While EPPs will not be receiving an overall rating this year, they will still receive a rating in each of the 3 score domains, and that includes candidate profile, employment, and candidate assessment. This scoring scale here is the same as last year. If you get above 75% or above of available points, you will get exceeds expectations. 50 to 74.9 is meets expectations, and 0 to 49.9 is does not meet expectations.
Are there questions so far? I know we have 2 members who are new to this subcommittee. So some of you have seen this presentation before. Some of you, the report card may be newer or something you use less often. What questions do you have? We're doing okay.
I have a question.
Bob, you should know all this.
I know.
Go ahead.
Actually, my question isn't about the process, and I do, for Jordan, and I don't know if Nick probably knows, I serve on the EPP Report Card Advisory Council. I'm the board member on that. And the process is very effective in listening to the EPPs and laying this out, and Erica and the team does an exceptional job. But you said one thing, Erica, that may not be really germane specifically to this, but I think it's very germane, particularly to the last topic we're talking about. You said that the third year retention rate data shows a decline. Do we know why that's true? And then how does that, do we know why the third rate retention is in a decline?
In this case, we can't tell just from looking at this data, especially because the benchmarks are based on data that does not include the current year. So this third year retention drop off at this point, we do not expect was due to COVID, because this would have happened actually before COVID. Any decline in third year retention in this year's data could conceivably be due to COVID. So we may be seeing that show up to some extent in this year's data, although I have also looked at this year's data and it is not, and there's no sort of dramatic decline in third year retention coinciding with COVID. So I can't unfortunately provide a good answer for you as to why that would be happening.
Yeah, I think it's something, Amy, that we might want over time or something, do some kind of research to find out why that's happening, and going back to the desire to encourage people in the teaching, et cetera. You know, what can we do, or how can we turn that around?
Yeah, it's a great point, because, you know, we can encourage people to go into the profession, but if they're not staying but a few years, you've got a leaky bucket, right? It's not really helping. We have reached out to TASPA, which is the Professional HR Administrators for School Districts organization. I need to follow back up with them to see if they are aware of any districts that collect sort of exit interview data. Why do people leave? We don't get that at the state level. And I don't know of anybody who aggregates it, even their professional organization. Really, my question is just which districts do this in any systematic way that they're aware of. So we can try to dig it down. It is really hard when we're getting into personnel level decisions to figure out exactly what's going on, because that is under the LEA's control, but we won't give up. We'll keep seeing what we have available.
Well, particularly if we're scoring the EPPs on third year retention rates, you know, are we, if there is a decline there, are we penalizing the EPPs for something that's out of their control? I mean, I'm not saying it's not a bad criteria, but you know, I think we need to understand as much as we can about what's causing it. If then a turnaround, we're going to evaluate EPPs on it.
Yeah, I agree. And that's part of why third year retention has fewer points than second year retention, just because there's a lot of other factors that affect how long anyone stays in a career. But your point is well taken, and we'll keep trying to follow up and get what data might be available.
And that is also why we go through this process of adjusting the benchmarks, because if performance is lower across the board, we don't expect that that's because of something individual EPPs are doing. So when we saw that the performance in third year retention overall had gone down a bit, to avoid penalizing EPPs for that, we made an appropriate adjustment in our performance benchmarks. All right. Moving on here, we have.
Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, please.
Just a quick question, following up on what Bob was just asking. You know, as I understand, we shifted the floor based on trends. Have we shifted the targets? And if not, what's the reasoning for that? And then a follow-up comment would just be, again, kind of building on what Bob was saying. I know in the private sector, this has been the last 2 years has been unprecedented in the amount of migration from not necessarily vertical within an organization, but you know, people leaving one industry and going into another. And I would anticipate that that's going to be reflected in your data in some form. So maybe to Amy's point, exit interview data can be really, really important, so we can figure out, are people leaving because of administrative and management issues? Are they leaving because of personal, maybe childcare or health related issues? Are they leaving because, you know, something has changed in their local area and the employment rates that are otherwise available to them are just significantly higher? It seems like we would want visibility of that in order to figure out how to improve retention. So two questions.
Regarding the targets, we do adjust those as well. The reason they were not adjusted this year is because the data on those, it just had not changed enough to warrant an adjustment. We round them off to, as you can see, they're all multiples of 5. So if small changes year over year to the averages don't usually result in a change to the targets or floors, it's only if we see a larger change that we would adjust the targets or floors. We happen to have no large enough changes this year to change any of the targets. For your other question, that I agree that further increases our need to know more about why people are moving around in the field. And I will say that if people move between schools or between districts, but they're still in Tennessee in a public school, we do still count them as having been retained. They don't have to be retained in the same school or the same district.
And they could also move to a charter school as well. But I think it's a fascinating question, and it's one we really don't have a lot of visibility into at the state level. So if we can't find, through TASPA or through other organizations, perhaps we can look at if we have any funds available for research. This might be an interesting partnership with, if any organizations have time to support us with qualitative studies of talking to people who have recently left the profession and starting to identify trends there.
Okay, so regarding new features of the report card this year, one item we have that had been on report cards a few years ago, but was then subsequently removed when we did a redesign, was including the N sizes for metrics. So this is just a count of how many people are included in each metric for the EPP. And this was still available in our data download, but the EPPs on our advisory council made it clear that they wanted to see this on the website as well. So we have restored this feature of having the N sizes shown on the website. It is important to note that for certain metrics, content area assessments is a good example. Sometimes the same person could be included in the count more than once. With content area assessments, for example, you might have multiple subject areas in which you are endorsed to teach. So perhaps you had to take an exam in both biology and chemistry so that you could get both the biology and chemistry endorsement. That person would be counted in the N count twice, one time for chemistry and one time for biology. All of this technical information is available in our technical report that we release concurrently with the report card for people who are interested in the fine details of how these metrics are calculated.
Just out of curiosity, Erica, do you ever find that the N size falls below the kind of the threshold 30 that's expected?
So we have a reporting threshold of 10, where if you don't have, you need to have at least 10 people in a metric in order for it to be reported. There are a few very small EPPs that have fewer than 10 people on some of their metrics. The majority of EPPs have far above 10. But then we also have, for certain metrics, there are further disaggregations where things are broken up, for example, by subject area. You can see, for example, if teachers from this EPP who teach elementary education are getting higher ratings in their teacher evaluation than teachers who teach secondary science. And in that case, there's a lot more programs who have fewer than 10 people within a specific subject area, and we're not able to report that. But in terms of the overall metrics, the majority of EPPs have enough data to report them, and only a few very small EPPs have their data suppressed due to small sample size.
Along those lines, Jordan, just for your reference and for anyone who's listening, in addition to this public report from the state board, each EdPrep also receives an annual report from the Department of Education that is just about their candidates and that can get to a much smaller level of detail and granularity in reporting. So we do have obviously data suppression rules in the public report, but EdPreps have a follow-up report that's just their data where they can get to some more detailed information.
Another new feature we have this year, I know the text on this slide is very small, but the point here is just that we have divided up endorsement areas that EPs offer into 3 different lists. There used to be just one giant list where it listed all the academic, occupational, and school services personnel endorsements in alphabetical order. There was no way to tell which type was which unless you happen to already know. But now they are listed by type so that you can tell if you're getting a regular academic teaching license, these are the areas of endorsement that are available at this program. If you're seeking an occupational license, it lists the areas that are available there. And also, if you're interested in becoming a school counselor, school social worker, school psychologist, or other services personnel, those are listed separately as well. Finally, we have new employment maps this year. We had no maps at all last year, which was kind of left an unfortunate blank spot on some of our web pages. So this year we have the return of employment maps, and they have been redesigned. They do show at the county level how many teachers from this EPP, this example here happens to be from Tennessee Tech, how many teachers from Tennessee Tech are employed in each county in the state. And this is not all teachers from Tennessee Tech ever. This is just teachers who have graduated from Tennessee Tech in one of the 3 years that we are including in this report card. So within that 3-year period, teachers from Tennessee Tech ended up working in these counties. We will also release a PDF list that breaks down further for districts that have more, or counties that have more than one district within the county. You can see in this PDF the breakdown specifically by district, and also in some cases also by charter schools.
I do want to just pause here. These were recreated through Erica's efforts. They went away last year due to some shifts in our typical vendor being bought out by another one, and that constrained some of what we would usually do. This year, Erica figured out how to recreate the maps herself, actually with a greater level of detail than we used to have, and then just was able to share them as an image with the vendor to include. So wanted to give credit where credit is due. I think this is interesting as someone who knew I wanted to go into teaching and had an idea of where I wanted to be physically located after I finished. This would have been helpful for me to say, okay, well, if I go to school X, I'm likely to get a job in districts A, B, or C. So I think this is a good re-edition.
I agree. I think these maps are excellent. Will provide future students and all some very valuable information. Well done, Erica.
Thank you. And I know that I certainly don't have the entire county map of Tennessee memorized, so that's why we also have the PDF that lists the counties. It lists counties by name and districts by name. So if you're not sure, for example, what that district or that county that has the 74 in it is, you can look on the PDF and see, oh, 74 for Tennessee Tech was Putnam County. So.
And I would know that very well. And I want to echo the comments, Erica. Thank you so much. Excellent work. And especially since we lost our vendor and you figured out how to do it better. So thank you so much. Excellent work.
Thank you. And then a couple other features we have this year, which I'm not going to show examples of, but just wanted to note them, is we have downloadable PDFs for all of the educator preparation providers. We've had those in the past, but this year we have added downloadable PDFs for the leader preparation providers as well, and a downloadable PDF for the state level report. So that will just make it easier for people who want to just save their program's performance, or if they want to just have a savable version of the state level performance that's easy to just keep in your files or archive. And we're looking forward to having those available once the report card has released on February 15th. All right, any questions about report card before I move on to the next presentation, which is on Edtpa?
Erica, do you mind? I know we have a number of ed preps participating through TACTI or just listening in. The embargo window, when they will see a preview of the update, that's coming up soon. Would you let them know when that is?
Yes, we're currently planning to send out a link to the embargoed report card on February 1st, which is 2 weeks prior to public release. This will be a password protected website that allows EPPs to see in advance what their report card is going to look like so that they can prepare any of their internal communications that they would like to have ready before this report card is released to the public. All right, not hearing any additional questions, I will move on to statewide and TPA results. This presentation is very similar to one I've given several times before. It just has updated data. So I will hopefully move through this fairly quickly since we're running a little bit behind schedule, but I think it's important to always see each year when we get updated EdCPA data to have a look at the trends. So first of all, I know most of the board members are familiar with EdTPA. It is a performance-based assessment of educator candidates' pedagogical practices. It is required for licensure for most licensure areas in Tennessee. The exception is a few career and technical education areas don't have an appropriate EdTPA assessment, but other licensure areas it is required. We have been told that it is a time-consuming assessment, but because it is aligned to the team evaluation rubric, it is a useful assessment for getting educators prepared for their first year in a way that just sitting, like going to a test center and taking a multiple choice assessment would not do. This assessment was initially developed by the Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity, or SCALE. And when SCALE developed EdTPA, they set a professional performance standard for it. They did this back in 2013, and they set this professional performance standard at 42 for most subject areas. There are a couple subject areas that have a higher or lower performance standard, and that's just because the test either has more or fewer parts. However, SCALE acknowledges that when you're using a test like EdTPA to make licensure decisions, which are basically a pass-fail decision, it's important to account for measurement error. All exams have some degree of measurement error, and the way to account for measurement error in this case is to set your cut score slightly below the recommended performance standard. States are allowed to set their own cut scores, and currently all states have cut scores that are below 42. The range currently is 35 to 41. Tennessee is at 40, so we have one of the highest in the country. At the February meeting, which is next week, the state board will consider an item on first reading to eliminate a scheduled increase in the EdTPA cut score. Currently, if no policy changes are made, Tennessee's EdTPA cut score will increase to 42 on January 1st, 2023 for most subject areas. It will increase in the other subject areas as well, but just to a different number than 42. The proposed item for next week would eliminate this increase so that the current qualifying score, which is 40 for most subjects, would stay in place. And as I mentioned, it would still be among the highest in the nation. Before I show some of the statewide data, I just wanted to make a few quick notes about this data. There are 3 cohorts of educator preparation completers included. These are people who completed their teacher preparation in 2017-18, 2018-19, and 2019-20. We get the official EdTPA scores that are reported by Pearson. We get these through a data partnership with the Tennessee Department of Education, and then we match them to the individuals who are in our educator preparation report card cohorts. In this particular data set, only tests that were reported on or before August 31st, 2020 are included. On report card data, we always have about a 1-year lag in the data, so that's why we're currently reporting 2020 data and not 2021 data. And only first attempts are included. But in the case of EdTPA, less than 5% of test takers had more than one attempt. So the vast majority of test takers, their first attempt was their only attempt. This slide here shows the pass rates we've had over those 3 years that are included in this year's report card. The Praxis PLT is here as a comparison. This is the other pedagogical assessment that is available, and it was previously, before 2019, it was possible to take either the Edtpa or the PLT for licensure. Now, most people have to take Edtpa. There are a few who can still take PLT, either because they're in a CTE subject area, or we also had a temporary allowance for taking PLT due to COVID, but that has now expired. In any case, the number of people taking the PLT each year has gone down. So I'm not sure that we need to be terribly concerned about the fact that the pass rate for that has been declining. I think that's just a result of fewer candidates taking that each year and more people focusing on the Edtpa instead. The Edtpa pass rate has, well, it's above 90%, and it dropped a little bit between 1819 and 1920, but that is likely because the cut score increased at that time. And despite the fact that the cut score increased, it was only a pretty minor decline in pass rates. If the pass rate, or if the cut score had been at 42, which is the recommended professional performance standard, it would have been substantially lower. But as you can see, the gap there between the actual pass rate and the pass rate at a cut score of 42 has been closing over time, which just indicates general stronger performance on Edtpa. Particularly in the current climate of teacher shortages, we want to be mindful of how many teachers are being affected or potentially affected by any changes we would make or this board would make in the Edtpa cut score. So you can see here that in the past 3 years, that middle column there includes people who would have, or they did pass Edtpa at a score of 40 or 41. If instead of our actual current cut score, we had the higher 42 cut score in place, those individuals in the middle column would not have passed. And they would have either had to take or resubmit the assessment, which can be a very time-consuming and expensive endeavor, or some of them may have decided that it was not worthwhile to do that and may have given up on getting a teacher license in Tennessee. So those are the people that we could have potentially missed out on as teachers the past 3 years if we had had a higher cut score in place.
Erica, this is Bob. One question looking at this data. One thing that's very interesting is that it appears our scores are going up. The number that are passed above 42 have increased pretty substantially, and the numbers that scored below 40 have decreased. So that tells me the EPPs are continuing to do a better job in preparing the students for the Edtpas.
Yes, that does indicate that the EPPs are getting, are refining their practices in terms of how to support candidates through Edtpa, and this is definitely a good thing to see, and it's what we also were expecting to see, knowing that some EPPs had just only recently started implementing Edtpa, and we know it takes a couple of years to really figure out exactly what you need to do to be successful at supporting candidates. As they've had more experience with that, they've gotten better and they've supported their candidates to get higher scores. All right, moving on, another important thing to watch for with all licensure assessments is diversity implications. We are in a situation here in Tennessee where the number of, or the percentage of educators of color is far below the percentage of students of color, and this is something that I know that our EPPs are interested in helping to ameliorate by getting more teachers of color into the classroom. And we want to make sure that we're not setting up unnecessary barriers for this. We had seen over the past several years, the gap in score between white teachers and teachers of color had pretty much closed. We saw this gap open up a little bit again back in the 2019-20 school year. We can't be certain about why that happened, although it is possible that it's related to COVID, because teachers in that 2019-20 cohort would have been, some of them would have completed Edtpa before COVID started affecting schools, but some of them would have been completing it in the spring semester of 2020, which we all know was very heavily disrupted for many schools. And why that might have had a differential effect on teachers from different backgrounds, we can't be certain about, but it could be related to where they were doing their Edtpa, which is related to where they had their student teaching placement. In terms of this gap, it's obviously like not what we want to see to have gaps opening back up, but it's also important to note that this gap was a lot bigger than this just a few years ago. So we have certainly not lost all of the progress that we've made towards parity. It's just a relatively small increase in the gap compared to what it was just even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago.
It's smaller than the gap that we see with other kinds of licensure assessments as well. So it's something to be monitored and to be aware of, but as Erica said, it's not something that's erased years of gains that we've made.
Erica, one quick question in the way that you're calculating this math, is there a range of error for this particular metric that you've determined? Is it 1%? Is it 5%?
So this is since this includes like everyone who is in this population of teachers, this would be like the exact, there wouldn't be any error for that particular cohort.
Okay, got it.
There would potentially be error if we were trying to extrapolate to future years or earlier years, but
you're capturing the full numerical population. Got it.
Yes, it is not just a sample, it is the whole population in that year.
Thank you.
Okay. To look at this a different way, this is the pass rates that we've seen. So the pass rates for teachers of color are now slightly lower than for white teachers, but even as recently, I looked back at 2016-17, which is only like 1 year before this chart begins. As recently as 16-17, there was almost a 10% gap in pass rates between white teachers and teachers of color. And so the gap we're seeing now is still meaningful, and we'll definitely want to continue monitoring that, but we have not lost all of the progress that we've made the past few years. And another thing that we do need to keep in mind is that the pass rate gaps could potentially change if the cut score is raised. In the case of raising the cut score to 42, for this most recent cohort, it would have increased the gap. If you saw on this slide here, the gap was about 3%. If the cut score had been 42 instead, it would have been about 4%. So not a lot larger, but still it would have slightly increased that gap.
Erica, just going back a couple of slides to the pass rate slide.
This one?
One question, yes. One question would be, you talked about how Tennessee is currently kind of in the upper, call it quartile of establishing that threshold score. We're talking about not going from 41 to 42 in the example that you gave. How does the pass rate change if it goes back 1 point? In other words, I'm assuming that it's a very skewed distribution. If, for example, that standard were relieved by 1 point, does that now take, for example, in the middle column at the bottom, 92.62%, does that go up 6%? Does it go up a fraction of a percent? How does it affect it with just 1 point move, out of curiosity?
So we can sort of see that from this chart here, because during the time that this data, between 2017 and 2020, we actually did see an increase. We had an increase in the cut score. So back in 2017-18, at that time, the cut score for most areas was 37. It went up to 38 in 2019, and then it went up to 40 in 2020. So throughout this period that is shown here, the cut score was increasing. And you can see that during that same time, the pass rate was declining, but it wasn't declining drastically.
Mhm.
So for the most part, EPPs and candidates were able to keep up with the rising cut score and continue to have a high pass rate despite the fact that the cut score was increasing.
Okay. I have a couple of other questions, but I'll reserve those for another day and get with you separately, so we don't bore everybody here today. Thank you. Excellent job.
Thank you. Okay, so in conclusion, according to the developers of Edtpa, it is appropriate to account for measurement error when setting a cut score to use Edtpa for licensure. Tennessee could have missed out on around 350 teachers over the past 3 years if the cut score had been set at Scale's professional performance standard. It is possible that some of these candidates, well, it's likely some of them would have become teachers anyway by retaking the assessment, but we know that it is time consuming and expensive to do so, and not all of them would have chosen to do it, most likely. Tennessee EPPs have made admirable progress in recent years in closing the Edtpa pass rate gap between white teachers and teachers of color. We are continuing to monitor that, especially considering the potential effects of COVID. And we also know that raising the Edtpa cut score has the potential to widen this gap. Yes, that's all I have for Edtpa, so I'll take any questions about that.
I was just going to mention, this is really great data. And one thing I know we've been able to do in previous years, and I wanted to let members know why we were not able to repeat it right now. We've looked at whether there's a correlation between scoring in a certain range on the Edtpa and either outcomes in the classroom in terms of teacher observation or in terms of student growth scores for teachers in a tested grade and subject. We were not able to repeat that because of testing being canceled for some years from COVID, teachers being able to nullify observation scores. Could you refresh our memory just a little bit? And I know I'm putting you on the spot. What were some of the things we found during those evaluations in terms of different ranges of cut scores on Edtpa, tracking with outcomes either in terms of TVAS or in terms of observation?
So we saw back when we were able to do this analysis, which was in 2018, there was a clear difference in scores between people who scored, there was a clear difference in educator teacher evaluation scores between people who had scored below 37, which was at the time was the cut score, and people who had scored above 42. For the people who were in between, in that middle range between 37 and 41, it was not always clear if they were statistically significantly different from either the people below 37 or the people above 42. But when we isolated just the people above 42 from the people below 37, there was a clear difference there with the people above 42 showing stronger teacher evaluation outcomes.
Amy, thanks for bringing that up because that was actually the question I was going to ask. And so then I'll follow that up. When do you think that data, we might be able to start looking at that data again? Because I think that's in our master plan, we talk about one of our missions is to provide high quality education for every student. And, there's certain things that impact that quality of education. If we had this data, it could really make a big difference in opening up potential teachers who have a very positive effect. So when do we think we might be able to get that?
Well, we do have teacher evaluation data from 2020-21. The caveat with that is that, well, of course, districts were held harmless for that data. EPPs are also being held harmless for that data. And teachers had the ability to nullify their evaluation score. And they were able to do that after they had seen what it was. So for that reason, we're not entirely sure about using that year's data for this purpose. In terms of the current school year, we'll have to wait and see how that assessment data is looking and what the conditions are like when that assessment is given.
Thank you. Good points. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments for Erica? I do want to state for the record, Erica, the services and the analysis that you provide to us as a board is just absolutely invaluable to the work that we are doing. And so I cannot imagine us doing this work without you. So don't get any ideas in your head. No, I really want to compliment you, and that's really what the bottom line message is, because your analysis is just really very vital, and thank you so much for that. I know we're running very, very late. I know we're supposed to stop at 3 o'clock, but we did want to allow more time for our discussion with our TACD partners. And so without further ado, I just want to open it up for discussion and welcome our TACD Executive Board members for being here with us. And I will just leave it this way. And Amy, unless there's a specific way that you want us to begin the discussion, or if you want us to just open it up for any comments regarding the presentations today, any particular topic that you want to bring forth today before we depart. But we want to allow
Madam Chair, I will let
Yes.
you run the show. You go ahead and moderate as you see fit.
Okay. Well, so I really are we're always very eager to hear from our TACD partners, and I'm so glad that you are joining us for this meeting again, and I hope that we'll continue this participation on your part, and I hope that you find it to be invaluable. So I will turn it over to you, and who's going to lead us off?
My name is Dave Chiak, but I'm not sure if people can hear me. I'm having issues with, okay, great, I'll be quiet. If not, Kim, I'm coming your way, all right? Because there's a lot of other TACD people up here, but let's get to it before I totally lose you. First of all, we really applaud this opportunity. My name is Dave Chiak. I'm the president-elect. Tricia sends her regards. She just couldn't make it. She was, I think, triple booked today. And probably shares the same thoughts that we all have is, thank you for allowing us to be a part of this process. And, it has been, I think it's strengthened all of our programs and all the pipelines and our work with the local schools when we're all partnering and working together. This was highlighted in the literacy modules that are being built, the trauma-informed modules that are being built, currently being piloted with 9 Edtpa programs. So those Edtpa programs coming together to develop and disseminate to all Edtpa programs a valid and reliable, and most importantly, a meaningful course materials or supplemental materials for all teacher prep and Edtpa, our principals too, across Tennessee. And I just wanted to mention that those Edtpa programs, while it's 9, I was thinking it might have been more, but while it's 9, they do represent the 3 grand regions, private and public, small, medium, and large sizes. And so it's a nice kind of sample of folks who I know who are not shy as one of the Edtpa programs that received a couple of the awards. We're already getting great feedback and really look forward to that continued work. So to touch on just a few others, I'm just going to kind of go in order, and I'll leave some time for the other members of the executive board to kind of weigh in and jump in if I forgot anything. But I also want to applaud Michael and Annie and their whole team looking at striking that balance to make sure we have the accountability of the new literacy standards and the trauma-informed standards and the high-quality instructional material standards. This has been a space in which Edtpa programs have been implementing, designing, and redesigning, a lot over the last few years. And with that guidance from the Department of Ed, it is, I think, really improved and strengthened all of our literacy programs. Not just having the one-off course here and there, but truly integrated in the practice throughout that development of the candidate. And so striking that balance, I know is going to be greatly appreciated. And, the signed assurances, the standards alignment, and the brief description, I think will greatly help us, make sure we meet that deadline. I really hate saying the words COVID, but they are still really taxing a lot of us here at Edtpa, and especially our partners with our schools. The shortages are real. Every day we are just getting more and more. Do you have teachers for us? Do you have teachers for us? Do you have teachers for us? We have seen a lot of increases in our alternative programs. So it is that relationship and that partnership is really growing every day. And to have those kind of candid conversations with them and with the department, and especially ensuring that we're accountable for the new literacy standards, we welcome in a meaningful way. But hopefully we don't have to throw everything at you to meet the April deadlines. And I know Andy and Michael will remind us that we always are evaluated every year on our annual reports, and then every 7 years, the more detailed, comprehensive review process takes place. So I just want to say thank you to Michael and Andy for really just hearing and listening to us and kind of, again, striking that balance, and looking forward to TACTI and hearing about the assurance and some of those other plans. I'll pause there before I kind of jump into what I thought some of the other next topic was, the teaching as the profession. But I wanted to pause there to see if Kim or other TACTI members, if you had any comments about that.
I'm going to be shockingly silent for right now. But thanks to you all for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all.
Thanks, Kim. This is Trisha. I was able to catch just the tail end of the meeting. So thanks, David, for jumping in. I wanted to just share a project that TACTI is working on that's going to convene February 8th and 9th. So we have gathered a group of ed prep people from across the state, all 3 regions, public and private. We've had great support from Michael and Annie. And we are endeavoring to create completer and alumni, completer and employer satisfaction surveys for use statewide. So we've got a great team gathered. They have gathered samples from all over the state. And I think it's going to probably take the whole spring semester, support from the Ed Prep work group, and some continued validity and reliability work throughout the semester. But we hope at the end of it that we have two surveys that are useful for across the state. So I'm really excited about this project. It's taking a lot of investment of time and energy of a lot of people, but the response we got, we had twice as many people apply to work for free as what we really felt like we could take in these groups. So I wanted this group to be aware.
That's amazing. I know Erica and I will be banging down your door to think about how to incorporate this on the report card in the future. And I just love that partnership, because it's going to be owning things that you all identify as important, that the LEAs identify as important, and then we're able to share it out on a state level, hopefully. But I'm super excited. Thank you.
That was actually the plan. I was going to bring that up on the report card, but thank you for bringing it up, Trish. Yeah, we're really excited about that, and we're really excited again to partner with the Department of Ed. And once upon a time, when I was on the EP working group, we started that work, and then that little COVID thing came, and so we're really happy, and our partners. All of that prep coming together, really wanted to be a part of this. So it's amazing that we have the group for the completers, we have the group for the employers, and we also have a nice review, reliability, validity group. So we all know how much we want those surveys to be valid and reliable. And, speaking to board member Ebby's kind of question about assessing some of these new courses that are being developed, again, I think we all would agree, yeah, that output on student growth, teacher performance is kind of our gold standard. But at least we can start getting some snapshots of that in terms of just surveying our completers, surveying our employers. Do their literacy practices, are they better prepared? Their use of high quality instructional materials, their use and ability to implement trauma-informed practices. We at least be able to get some of that snapshot, in terms of that continuous improvement, kind of process.
Just a clarifying question regarding that. Did you say that it would be across all EPPs that would be doing these surveys, or is this, I think that it was Dean Hunsetter that you said that it's a sampling of EPPs across? I want to make sure I was clear on that, if it would be all EPPs participating in
Okay, so it's a
conducting the
representative.
survey. So I want to make sure I got that clearly.
Okay, it's a representative group that is going to do the development work. But we have collected samples from EPPs across the state, and we have the support of EPPs across the state for us to engage in this work.
Okay.
We've had no pushback. Everyone is thrilled that we're engaging in this project.
That's excellent news. Thank you so much. Anything else you all want to share with us today? Any comments regarding what you heard today?
I appreciate our new board member, who's actually my representative over in our district, taking Mike Edwards' place. And I haven't had the opportunity to meet you in person yet, but I really appreciate your question on what would happen if we dropped that Edtpa by 1 point, because I think, when we look at people that that are teaching our children in Tennessee, we certainly have, Edtpa is not required if someone comes from outside of the state. So I think it's real interesting to look at what would happen if our people within the state had an opportunity to become a teacher, if they came within 1 point. And I've kept myself muted most of the time because I have a new puppy and my old dog is trying to fight with my new dog. So that's the background going on here. But I appreciate that question, and I appreciate you all considering test scores and considering looking at what would happen if they're dropped and not continuing to increase. I also would appreciate you all looking at other requirements. For example, currently, test scores are no longer accepted if they're under 5 years old, because what's accepted is only what's required for licensure right now. And so I appreciate where you all have created some guidance on some of those kinds of things. Michael, I believe you worked with the board on, you're not using the word grandfathering in folks, but that's kind of essentially what's happening. But I have one right now who passed the Praxis PLT back in 2018, and then that's under 5 years old. But if that were to be accepted, she could be licensed as a special ed teacher right now. So I appreciate you all looking at those special instances like that. So just thanks for your work, and thanks for your always thinking through these things. And hey, Bob Eby, I like to always give you a hard time, and a shout out to Nick in the next door county over there. So thanks to you all.
Hey, Kim, I almost had a heart attack when you said you were being quiet, but it's great seeing you.
Very good. Thank you.
Touche, Bob, touche.
Other comments? Hearing none, we'll conclude this discussion unless there's somebody else who wants to jump in. But thank you all so much. We appreciate you sharing with us today and joining us here. I don't know when our next meeting will be, but we definitely will be inviting you again. So thank you so much for being here. We are at the point where we are going to adjourn. Just a few simple closing comments as always. Thanks to everyone for your engagement, in particular our new members to this subcommittee, or it's not a subcommittee, it's a study committee now. So thank you so much. I have to get used to our own change in terminology. So thank you so much, and welcome Jordan Mullenhour. As you all know now, he is actually a new board member. He will be joining our first quarterly meeting next week, so we're looking forward to his service. You can tell from his participation today, he is highly engaged, and we're excited about him joining. Without any further ado, unless Dr. Amy Owen has any other comments for us today, we will be adjourned in just a moment. Dr. Owen, anything to add?
Thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing many of you in Nashville next week at the board meeting.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. We are officially adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.